I hope it's going to be okay. Yeah. Okay, for today, I'm going to move on in the same field or the same area of racial and maybe I should say the effect of the Civil War and all this business that went around the Civil War during the 1850s, 60s, and 70s, where we had really so many disastrous consequences of the Civil War. And I think all this area, all this, if you like, this field we have seen is, as you can see, it's all around the question of slaves and slavery and all that. And last time as I said, with the poem by Whitman, talking about the death and the killing and the assassination of President Lincoln, it was within the same, circumstance and conditions. Today, I will give you an example of slave narrative. A slave narrative, it's not really a novel or a play or a poem or something. It's really an example of autobiography. Of course, later on, we shall see in our outline, in our plan, we will give a very strong text by Mark Twain later on. But this week we'll spend it to show you as an example, as I said, this really great autobiography by Booker Washington. And Washington, here, if I start sharing with you the text, can you hear me all?
Yes, doctor.
Yes, doctor.
Very good. And do you see my screen now?
Yes, it's clear.
Yeah.
But
So this is the example. Only we have about 3 chapters of this. Really, we are not going to give, as you can see later, we will not give a lot of details about each example or each text, since our course is, as you know, is survey. So I'm not going really to give details about that. So this is a long introduction, a long book. As I said, it's an autobiography by this black man, black slave. Originally, really, he's talking himself as a slave, and later on how he, got freed from slavery. This is, if you like, a typical, realistic, historical, recording or registration, if you like, of what really slavery was during that time, which of course would explain why people went into war for 5 years, as I said, the Civil War, to free slaves or those who wanted to keep slaves. I don't know. Somebody's saying something. I don't know what's. If you have a problem, I don't know. Sort it out, please, with your machine or something. Is my voice? You can hear me?
Yes,
Somebody,
sir.
I don't know.
Yes,
Yeah. Yes. So this text here, as you can see, the title "Up from Slavery," by this man Booker T. Washington, American writer and educationist. Born a slave in Virginia, he was later educated at the Hampton Institute and went on to establish and head the Tuskegee Institute in Alabama. Up from Slavery, published 1901, Booker Washington's autobiography details his rise from slavery to the leadership of his race. This is a simple yet dramatist record of Washington's dedication to the education of Black Americans. Really, ladies and gentlemen, even till today, we see this problem with the question of, blacks. I mean, if you watch the news these days, how much the effect, since maybe 2-3 months back till now, problems are already, or are already or still really, going on the streets of America because of this question of the treatment or the differentiation or the racial discrimination between blacks and whites. And really, this is the idea here, the whole situation. In chapter 1 here, I will go through, because I highlighted this for you, and you have it in front of you with you in the booklet as highlighted as it is here. Now, in chapter 1, he's talking about, the origins of, his, if you like, life as when he was born and so on. So notice the title, A Slave Among Slaves. Remember, I think, again, we shall see many times, really, the way these people write really is very emotional and very touchy, and you feel a lot for those, or for them, the way they record or narrate their stories, or real stories, of course. Remember, this is autobiography. This is supposed to be reality. Of course, it's written in a sort of subjective way. Could be there are some, fictional stuff in it, but, we read it as literature, because autobiography, as maybe we know, really is part of literature. So here we see him talking really in details and the emotional way how he was born, and notice how he says this. Of course, you read it. You please read the whole thing here, the section I gave you, because it really is very important to evaluate and to study this, to maybe re-narrate later on. If I ask you a question in the exam, is to to re-evaluate the whole thing. What do you think of this? And give me the main ideas, the main points, or discuss it, or argue either with or against, or what do you really think, or what do you really make out of it? This is the idea that we have to concentrate on. So notice, for example, he said, I was born, he said, I am not quite sure of the exact place or date or date of my birth, but at any rate, I suspect I must have been born somewhere at some time. And this is really funny. Sometimes, people sometimes, even in all societies, sometimes people don't know exactly, the exact date of their birth, and or even the exact place where they were born. I mean, that's natural even in our country, in our cultures here. We have so many people who have no idea where they were born or when they were born. Myself, actually, I don't really know exactly my birthday, which really to me doesn't matter. As nearly as I have been able to learn, I was born near a crossroads post office called Hales Ford, and the year was 1858 or 1859. I don't know the month or the day. The earliest impressions I can now recall are of the plantation and the slave quarters, and later being part of the plantation where the slaves had their cabins. I mean, when you look at this, the real simplicity and the naivety, you have no idea where he was born, when he was born, the place, and the quarters. He said slave quarters, the area where the slaves are. And again, he used the word cabin, because remember that last time I mentioned to you about Harriet Beecher Stowe's book, which is called Uncle Tom's Cabin. Remember? I mentioned that to you as an example of racial narrative or slave narratives. The best example, the earliest and strong example of slave narrative really was that one, Uncle Tom's Cabin. And here he uses the same thing, because they were like cabins. They were very tiny, small rooms, maybe 2 meters by 2 meters, or 3 meters by 2 meters, or 3 or 4, whatever. And they call them cabins, not rooms, because they don't look like rooms or bedrooms or sitting rooms and things like that. My life had its beginnings in the midst of the most miserable, desolate, and disturbing surroundings. Yeah, because in this paragraph, that's what he said. Of course, he summarizes it in the first sentence. He said his life, it was always, I think almost always miserable, always desolate, always really in a very horrible, discouraging, if you like, as he said, surroundings. Of course, as a slave, that's the idea. I mean, we don't expect anything better. In the next paragraph, he moves to say, my ancestry. I know almost nothing, about his parents, his family background, his parents or grandparents, and so on. And really, this is very important. Slaves were always kept in the dark about who they really were, or who were parents, if you like, who their parents or their fathers really were. They never told them, because they normally separated children or kids or even babies from their parents or mothers, at least. I think this is the idea here. We shall see a lot of, as I said, emotional thing here. So notice he said, in the slave quarters and even later, I heard whispered conversation among the colored people of the tortures which the slaves, including no doubt my ancestors on my mother's side, suffered in the middle passage of the slave ship while being conveyed from Africa to America. I have been unsuccessful in securing any information the world would throw any accurate light upon the history of my family beyond my mother. She, I remember, had a half brother and a half sister. In the days of slavery, not very much attention was given to family history and family records. That is, black family records. My mother, I suppose, attracted the attention of a purchaser who was afterward my owner and hers. You see, he's telling us, really, as he said, very emotional details, how he was sold with his mother as a baby. Her addition to the slave family attracted about as much attention as the purchase of a new horse or cow. Again, notice the sentimentality and the melodramatic situation when he's saying, my mother was like being a cow or a horse being bought from a new farm to another farm. And this is the idea of, to purchase, to buy like buying a new horse or like buying a new cow. Of my father, I know even less than my mother. I don't even know his name. I have heard reports to the effect that he was a white man who lived on one of the nearby plantations. And I think this is the idea. These people used to do this a lot. These slaves, these slave women, slave young ladies, they were abused by their masters, and they were really sexually abused and used by their masters. And they gave birth to so many kids and so many illegal or illegitimate children. And these children were never admitted by their parents. Even their fathers knew that these kids were theirs, because they knew that they did it. And really the idea here, it shows how hard and how terrible these people were really inhumanly or humanely treated by their slave masters. And I think, the idea here is being used here or highlighted strongly to suggest how terrible the slave system and the slave, if you like, all this slavery was really terrible. And that's why he said, even my father, if my father as a master or as a white master would want to say, yes, this baby is mine, he said the institution would not let them. And this is what he said. But I don't find it special fault with him. He was simply another unfortunate victim of the institution, which the nation unhappily and had engraved upon it at that time. Meaning, as a white master, you are taught and educated by your family institution or education or the government, the white government, to say you should not acknowledge and say that this is your baby, you know, given birth by your slave woman, you know, black woman. And I think this is the idea, which is, he wants to say, that's why we don't know our fathers. And he says this gave later on many examples about that, as I said. And I think this is, you know, one of the indications, one of the things about the atrocities and the bad things about the slave and slavery system. And here the next paragraph, he talks about the cabin or the house or the room, or he called it the living place. Notice the cabin, one little cabin, was not only our living place, but was also used as the kitchen for the plantation. My mother was the plantation cook. So she was the cook for the whole plantation. She was, you know, a slave and working everything, including being the cook. The cabin was without glass windows. It had only openings in the side which let in the light and also the cold, chilly air of winter. There was a door to the cabin that is something that was like, or that was called a door, but the uncertain hinges by which it was hung and the large cracks in it, to say nothing of the fact that it was too small, made the room a very unfortunate or uncomfortable one. You know, you can imagine it's a tiny room, and it's a kitchen, and it's a sleeping place, and a living place, and the, you know, the bedroom, the kitchen, and even you know, all the things in the same little cabin. And you can imagine the terrible, really, absolutely the terrible, the way he describes this. As I said, there's a lot of drama, a lot of melodrama, a lot of sentimentality. And I think we understand that. We really say, yeah, I mean, this is the situation. And I think there's no way that we say this is not possible, or this is not true. And I think this is absolutely emotional there. He gives more and more. Notice he said, in addition to these openings, there was in the lower right-hand corner of the room a cat hole and a contrivance which almost every mansion or cabin in Virginia possessed during the antebellum period. And this is the exact idea, which is, you know, the period here, this period called antebellum, which is to do like the term is used here for the slavery and the slave system. They use that phrase or expression. We will see this repeated many times before. The cat hole was a square opening about 7 by 8 inches, provided for the purpose of letting the cat pass in and out of the house at will during the night. In the case of our plantation cabin, I could never understand the necessity for this contrivance or convenience, since there was at least a half dozen other places in the cabin that would have accommodated the cats. And again, he said, there was no wooden floor in our cabin, the naked earth being used as a floor. Okay, you still see my screen, boys and girls?
Yes, doctor.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, we can really see this, that the way he's saying about the, as I said, the melodrama of having a house with only, as he said, naked earth, which is nothing on the ground, on the floor, really. Again, he talks about the fireplace, really in a very funny way. And in the next paragraph, he moves on he moves on to talk about, notice, the early years of my life, which were spent in the little cabin, were not very different from those of the thousands of other slaves. So he is elaborating and here giving more details about, you know, the life of the other people around him, the same situation or all together. Of course, he said here, the way he talks about his mother, how she was moving around, and you know, the way she kept them, and the way she had to look after her kids, at the same time do all the work, the outside work and the inside work, and so on. And that's why he said his mother, sometimes he said, she snatched a few moments for our care in the early morning before her work began. And at night, after the day's work was done, one of my earliest recollections is that of my mother cooking a chicken late at night and awakening her children for the purpose of feeding them. How or where she got it, I don't know. I presume, however, it was procured from our owner's farm. Some people may call this theft. If such a thing were to happen now, I should condemn it as theft myself. Well, I don't know. I mean, the idea here, you know, if you are working days and nights in a farm and you eat from the farm that you are working days and night, whether you eat the food or the bread or the corn or the wheat or the whatever fruit that you are, you know, harvesting, I don't think it's a theft. Even, you know, he's saying, maybe today you may call this theft, but in reality, he said it should not be seen as a theft. As we say, I think we have this in Arabic, we say, أعطيه الخبز للخباز لو أكل نصه. أعطيه خبزك للخباز ولو أكل نصه. Means, because normally we say, when you do something, especially like this with food, and you eat some of it, you know, it's not haram. You know, this is the idea, he said. And he's saying, I mean, I don't know. What do you think? Hello? Hello? Yeah? Any comments? If you are working in a farm and you started to eat whatever, as he's saying here, if you are picking oranges or apples, would you snatch an apple and eat it? If you are hungry and you are working in the same place and you feel hungry, you take one apple and start eating it. Would you think this is not good?
I think it depends on the situation. If my master was cruel, maybe I will eat because of hunger or mistreated. But if he is good at me, I will not take from him without his knowledge.
Yeah, but still, when you are really working in a field, picking apples or picking oranges or picking pears or picking whatever nuts, and you crack one nut while you are working, would you think this is like, as I say, you know, like in a bakery? I said, in a bakery, if you gave your you know, bread to be baked and someone, you know, tasted some of it, I think this is not haram. Come on, in my own, if you like, judgment, this is okay when you are working and having really, you know, a lot of efforts and so on. It's okay. It's absolutely fine. I don't know. I mean, I'm not looking at the religious implications of that, but I think when you look about the human attitude towards it, I think here he said, this is the situation. He said, my mother would do this because we were starving, and she would bring us something to eat because we are starved and nobody is giving us anything. And so that's why he said, maybe some people would call this theft. Notice he said, but taking place at that time, it did. And for the reason that it did, no one could ever make me believe that my mother was guilty of thieving. You see, this is it. He said, I would never think that my mother was thieving or was stealing anything because we were starved. We were not given anything. So this is it. You know, the idea, sometimes people's, you know. So that's why he said she was very, notice, she was simply a victim of the system of slavery. And I think that's the summary of it. The victim of the system of slavery. Yeah, that's the idea. In the next paragraph, he talks about, you know, how they spent as he was a child, and the idea of sports and pastimes. He said, when we were kids, I was never given any attention. We were never given any attention or chance to have our good time, or to be given really any attention as young children, to care for as, you know, boys or small boys or girls, to give us sports or how to play in playgrounds or whatever. And I think he says this in a very dramatic way. Again, he said, why? Because he said, every day of my life has been occupied in some kind of labor, meaning I was forced, even as a baby, as a child, since the day I started to walk, I was started, if you like, he said, started or occupied to do some work. Even as a child, I was forced to work, you know. And this is the idea here, really. The problem that these people were enslaved, you know, mothers and children, everybody, fathers, children, everyone were forced into work on the plantation. Everybody, you know, everyone has his or her role to do. And this is really, he explained that. At the end, of course, of this paragraph, really, it's very nice paragraph. Please read all of it. I can't read it for you here. I'm just highlighting. Again, he was saying about how he would go on and, you know, the work. He said, the road was so lonely one and often led through dense forests. I was always frightened. You know, the way he was made to go and travel, if you like, into distant areas, distant places around the plantation. And he said, like forests. And, you know, as being a child, you know, young boy like him, he said, I was always lonely and I was always terrified, you know, because of the way they were making me to do things which were really, you know, very difficult. Otherwise, he said, I would always be, you know, punished and beaten by the master. And again, he says this, notice, the woods were said to be full of soldiers who had deserted from the army. And I had been told that the first thing a deserter did to a Negro boy that he found him alone was to cut off his ears. Besides, when I was late in getting home, I knew I would always get a severe scolding or a flogging. You see? So even he said, as a boy, if I was sent to do something in a mission or something, and even if I was late, I was always punished. And notice the word flog, you know, to flog, really to beat a horse or an animal or a donkey or something like this, like a mule. You know, this is what we call flog. Or, you know, we have a saying like flogging the dead horse, you know. So really, this is a terrible, you know, the way he's saying, a terrible way of treating or maybe bringing up these children. Again, the next paragraph, he moves on to school, whether they were allowed to go to school. He said, no way. Notice, I had no schooling, whatever, while I was a slave. You see, so this is it. You know, briefly, he says, no one will be allowed to go to school. The only thing he said, he used to go with the, you know, with the mistress to carry for her. And I think he said it here. For him, you know, he said, though I remember on several occasions, I went as far as the schoolhouse door with one of my young mistresses to carry her books. The picture of several dozen boys and girls in a schoolroom engaged in study made a deep impression upon me. And I had the feeling that to get into a schoolhouse and study in this way would be about the same as getting into paradise. You know, again, notice the emotionality. As I told you before, really the emotionality and the, as I said, the melodrama and the exaggeration. Maybe we believe him when he said, to me as a slave boy, you know, the feeling that I had, you know, to go to school like going to paradise, because he was never allowed to go to school as a young boy. And really this is the idea, which is, I think we believe it, and we believe him when he said that. Again, he says about, he discussed about the question of freedom, how slaves started to talk about freedom. Notice, so far as I can recall, the first knowledge that I got of the fact that we were slaves and that freedom of slaves was being discussed was early one morning before day, when I was awakened by my mother kneeling over her children and fervently praying that Lincoln and his armies might be successful, and that one day she and her children might be free. You see, so this is it. Slaves were praying with Lincoln. Remember, this is Abraham Lincoln, the president who was assassinated. About, remember the poem I gave you last time, and this is the idea that Lincoln and the North were fighting for the freedom of the slaves. And that's why here slaves were praying for their success, because they will, you know, get freedom at the end, and they will be seen as, you know, citizens of the nation in this way. And that's why he's saying here, we started to understand the question, or the political question, or the social question, or the position of the blacks in this country here, or if you like, this terrible racial discrimination against us blacks. And here he's talking about the national question, or national questions about the whole thing. He said it in the last sentence of this paragraph. He said, these discussions showed that they understood the situation, meaning they, the slaves, understood the situation, and that they kept themselves informed of events by what was termed the grapevine telegraph. Grapevine telegraph, meaning one farm would tell the next farm, and the next farm would tell the next farm, and the news will reach distant places, will tell about what's happening in the war against slavery. And I think this is, you know, the idea here about that, which is really very interesting about. And the idea, I think, as I say, is very dramatic and very emotional. And the next paragraph, he started to talk more about the political situation in the North and the South. He says it, he explains it. Notice about Lincoln and so on. He said, when war was begun between the North and the South, every slave on our plantation felt and knew that, though other issues were discussed, The primal one was that of slavery. And really the idea here, I think, as I said, it's very clear. I don't think I need to read that. You can read it on your own. And he said this about the thing, how the question of the war and the development of the war and so on. Again, notice here in the next paragraph, he said, I can't remember a single instance during my childhood or early boyhood when our entire family sat down to the table together and God's blessing was asked and the family ate a meal in a civilized manner. Well, of course, you know, the idea here to say when, you know, as a slave family, yes, you will have no chance to sit together with your family because, yeah, it's impossible because, you know, the terrible conditions under which they are living, yeah, they can't sit together like a family because they were not allowed to and they never had the time to because, you know, they were always kept somehow busy. And that's why he said, we really never sat in a civilized manner. Again, he said, on the plantation of Virginia, and even later, meals were gotten by the children very much as dumb animals get theirs. Well, again, as I said, maybe you can say, well, come on, this is maybe a bit exaggerated. Yeah, could be, and might be true. You know, like dumb animals. Yeah, it's like, you know, as you're throwing to your animals, you know, like throwing them fodder, which is, you know, in a way, this is possible. And I think he's, to some extent, maybe you can say, yes, that's true. So the question again, he's trying to highlight here, and you really emphasize the question of freedom and wanting freedom and so on. And in the next paragraph, he said again about the war. He said the war went on, and he said in many cases often found it difficult to secure food for themselves, and you know, and the way he talks about that, and then again he goes back to his own personal attention. He said about his dress, about his shoes, the shoes that he was wearing, the shirts that he was wearing, the clothing, and all this really again in a very emotional way. And he said all of this, it was really terrible. The whole thing to him was really in a very kind of punishment. He said ordeal. Notice, a trying ordeal. And ordeal, it's like a disaster. You know, the way he was always looking at everything like a form of torture, even his shoes, even his shirts, or the whatever he was wearing, the flax shirts, you know, the trousers and so on. He said everything was given to them in a very, really horrible way. The garments, he said, the torture, he said, you know, you really, it's a very, again, emotional way, a melodramatic way, yes, but it can be, as I said, it can be absolutely true. The next paragraph, again, he's talking more and more about how, you know, the relationship between blacks and whites, the feeling, the connection, the exchange between, you know, or the emotional exchange, if you like, between blacks and whites, and so on. So he said, you know, he's saying that we blacks, we black people were always, if you like, he wants to say, and I think he said it, we were always very honorable and we would never do something bad and so on. But you know, white men or white man, if you like, maybe said something else. So that's why maybe for some people this might be questionable. I don't know. But the idea, he said that we were generally more, if you like, sympathetic, and we understand how we were treated. We wanted freedom, but we were never violent, and so on. And I think he said this here. Notice he said that this tenderness and sympathy on the part of those held in bondage was the result of their kindly and generous nature. You see, this is the idea about the nature of the slaves, because they were really weak and they were tender and they were, you know, if you like, not violent, because they want only freedom. And he capitalizes on this when he says the slave who was selected to sleep in the big house during the absence of the males was considered to have the place of honor. You know, here the way he said this, how blacks really revere and they respect and they really love their, if you like, masters, or in a way they look at them in a very sort of respectful way, and the way they look at them as their protectors, when in reality the situation was absolutely questionable. And he said that even more when he goes on in this. Notice, as a rule, not only did the members of my race entertain no feelings of bitterness against the whites before and during the war, but there are many instances of Negroes tenderly caring for their former masters and mistresses who for some reason have become poor and independent since the war. Now, you know, the idea as if to say, even he's saying we were really kind and nice and so on, friendly, even to our previous masters, meaning when they even became free, they still had the same good, respectful, tender relationship to their ex-masters. And to say, because this is us, you know, this is our own kind natured, if you like, society. And I don't know, I mean, this is the emotionality about it. And he goes on and on and on about, again, the question of trust. He said, we blacks are trustworthy. We never betray. We never betray our masters. He said that, notice. I have said that there are few instances of a member of my race betraying a specific trust. Meaning, we as blacks are trustworthy. And if you trust us, we would never betray you. And that's what he said. He said, I have no idea, I cannot give you any example of anybody who really maybe betrayed his master. We were totally trustworthy and we kept our sincere relationship and trust to our masters. And he said that, and he gives examples of this. And I think in many ways, you know, I think this is exaggerated to some extent. Notice here what he said here in this. From some things that I have said, one may get the idea that some of the slaves did not want to be or did not want freedom. This is not true. I've never seen one who did not want to be free or one who would return to slavery. I pity from the bottom of my heart any nation or body of people that is so unfortunate as to get entangled in the net of slavery. Yeah, this is good. Yeah, this is the idea, really, that he said, yeah, I pity anyone, he said. Anyone, any person, any man or woman or whatever, even he said, or a nation, to be unfortunate, he said, unfortunate to be a slave or to be still in the net, he said, entangled or strangled, really, if you like, smothered by the system of slavery. You know, and he goes on and on about this. I think you should read all that. But look at this here, I highlighted. But let me put off this AC first. Are you still with me, boys and girls?
Yes, sir.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Okay. Okay. Very good. Now, facts in the fridge that, notwithstanding the cruelty and moral wrong of slavery, that the 10 million Negroes inhabiting this country, who themselves or whose ancestors went through the school of American slavery, remember here he's mocking using the word school, are in a stronger or more hopeful condition, materially, intellectually, morally, and religiously, than is true of an equal number of black people in any other portion of the globe. So notice here, really, he's generalizing. He's talking about slavery, not only in America, but he said everywhere in the world, throughout the globe. He said, nobody, you know, we feel all the same. We have the same thing. We are not different. We are not better. We are not even worse than all slaves everywhere in the world. And here, I think, in a very funny way, I think, in my view, funny way that he goes back to the question of God and providence and you know, the idea of heaven and God and the way destiny and fate and so on. Again, he said the question of providence, you know, he uses the word providence, meaning the idea of God, how were we really enslaved in the name of God? Yeah, of course, you know, the idea. Yes, I think religion, I think even till now, religion is used in a very negative way by so many wicked, whatever systems everywhere in the world. People still use religious, you know, ideology or religious fervor and things like that to accomplish what they want to accomplish of any really terrible political or social or ideological, whatever reason. And I think this is the idea here. He's saying in the name of religion and in the name of God, they enslaved us a lot, you know, to say this. And I think we see this, in so many ways in American history and in American culture, and not only in American culture, but also even today, you know, soldiers or American soldiers are told, American soldiers everywhere in the world, they are told that they are serving their nation by killing Iraqis or Syrians or Indians or Moroccans or anybody else because they are serving their nation, which is, you know, to some extent, you know, this is absolutely rubbish and nonsense. And, you know, in the name of democracy and the name of all these things, of course, you know, you can see all this connection really is used in a very funny and absolutely wicked way. Again, you know, he said, I remind them of the wilderness through which and out of which a good providence has already led us. And, you know, in the next paragraph, he goes on and on about the question of labor and work and slavery and the conditions under which these people and the badge of degradation, meaning these people, when they got their freedom, these white people couldn't do any work, and we have to go back and help them and so on. And he said this really throughout this section here at the end of chapter 1. Please read all this and try to summarize this briefly. Later on, I might ask you to evaluate and to analyze this section here, to give me your own, really, your own reading, your own appreciation of this. Okay? And that's why I will stop here today at the end of this chapter 1. Next time, I will start in chapter 2. As I told you today at 1 o'clock, after 5-7 minutes, I have a meeting. And that's why I will stop here and I will give you I'll continue from there from here next time, and I will give you the floor for questions. If you want to ask any question, I'll be more than happy to answer your questions. Yeah? Questions?
Sir, I don't have a question about what we just studied, but like in general, would there be a project for the semester? A project?
Yeah, there is a project. I mentioned that in the outline. Check the outline. I said, yeah, in my outline there is a project or a term paper. Yes, and it has 20 marks. As I said, two midterms. 1 week 6, beginning of week 7, which is an exam, 20 marks. Another 1 week 11 or week 12, 20 marks. A term paper, 20 marks, and the final exam, 40. So
okay.
if you want to think of the term paper, you can think, but I will talk about that myself later on.
Okay, thanks.
Okay. Yes, any questions?
Doctor, excuse me.
Boys and girls.
Yes. Why did Washington exaggerate the slavery in dramatic way?
Yeah. Well, well, of course, to draw the sympathy and the attention, isn't it? In a way, one reason maybe you can say that he was doing this really to make us believe him, because yes, blacks and non-whites, absolutely they believe him. And of course, he was writing for everybody, for whites and blacks, because yes, I think he did it deliberately to some extent. Maybe for some of us may think of this as exaggeration. I mean, I said this exaggeration, as I said, really to attract attention and to say, this is what was going on, so you have to believe us. You know, maybe this is one of the reasons, of course. Yeah, any more questions? Well, yeah?
Why he used the standard language of English instead of his dialects, Black English?
Yeah, very good question. Yeah, well, he's an educated person, because later on he was educated and he's writing in a very good English. He's not writing fiction, you know. He's not writing a short story or fiction or a poem to use dialect or colloquial English. Later on, I will give you examples of people writing in colloquial English, but remember, he's writing autobiography, and he was later on, he received good education, and he's showing, I said, look, I can write and speak as an educated person like anybody else, far better than white man. Really, that's why. Okay, I think I will have to stop because I need to join now in 2-3 minutes. I need to join the other meeting. Thanks for being with me today, and I will see you next time, inshallah. Thanks very much, and I will stop the recording now.